The night Nathan Johnson was lowered into the ground, Fort Worth's sky looked bruised, purple and swollen like the grief everyone assumed I carried. People said the wind felt like mourning. They said I looked like it too. A widow at 69, in a black dress that hung loose on my shoulders, hands trembling around a paper cup of cheap funeral coffee. They meant well, I suppose. "Lucia, if you need anything, call me," murmured neighbors who never knew how to say Nathan's name without lowering their voices. I nodded. I thanked them. I played the fragile role expected of a woman newly broken. But I was not broken. Not even close. Because while the mourners wept and held my hands as though I might crumble, my eyes stayed locked on the basement door at the far end of our 1940s brick home. The same door Nathan shut every night at 9:30 p.m. on the dot. Same key, same lock, same order. "Lucia, darling, don't go down there, ever." 30 years I obeyed him. 30 years I never so much as touched the doorknob. Not once. But grief does something strange. It turns fear into permission. And the moment everyone left, the house became quiet enough for me to hear my own pulse. Loud. Alive. I walked down the hallway, still in my funeral shoes, and stopped at the locked basement door. My reflection stared back from the polished brass knob. My hand hovered, shaking not from sadness, but from the kind of curiosity that could swallow a person whole. I slipped the key from my pocket, the one Nathan kept on his keyring for decades, the one I'd seen him use every single night before bed. It slid into the lock, but it didn't turn. The key didn't fit. It had been changed. Recently. Even as death dug its claws into him, Nathan secured that lock, not to protect me, but to protect whatever was behind it. The morning after the funeral, I woke to an empty house that felt too large and too still. I didn't cry. I didn't call Nathan's family. I didn't open the casserole dishes stacked in the refrigerator or read the sympathy cards piled on the counter. I sat at the kitchen table, still in my robe with my hair unbrushed, and stared at the basement door from across the hallway. 30 years of that door. 30 years of rules. 30 years of silence. I picked up my phone and searched for a locksmith. Not Nathan's brother, who would have asked questions. Not my stepson, who would have told me to wait, to grieve, to be reasonable. Just a stranger with tools and the good sense not to pry. He arrived just after sunrise. A kind-eyed Texan in his 40s with a worn tool bag and dusty boots. He tipped his head in polite greeting and followed me down the hallway without a word. When I gestured to the basement door, he knelt and studied the lock, letting out a low whistle. "This lock's been reinforced," he said, glancing up at me. "Recently, too. Whoever installed this didn't want anyone getting in." "Can you open it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Give me 15 minutes." I stood in the hallway and watched him work. The metallic scraping of his tools echoed through the house. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat louder than the last. "What are you so afraid of?" I asked myself. But I already knew the answer. Not what was behind the door, but what it would mean if I was right. 14 minutes later, the lock clicked. The sound was sharp, final, like a bone snapping. The door creaked open an inch, and a draft slithered past me, cold, metallic, with the faint smell of antiseptic and something older. Something like time rotting slowly. I paid the locksmith in cash, thanked him quietly, and waited by the window until the sound of his truck faded down Benbrook Highway. Only then did I return to the hallway. The door stood open, just a crack. I placed my hand on the wood and pushed. The hinges groaned, a sound that seemed to stretch across 3 decades. The darkness shifted, thick and waiting. I reached for the pull string just inside the doorframe. My fingers found it, cold and rough like twine.
I pulled. The bulb flickered on, and I froze. The basement didn't reveal dust and cardboard boxes like I expected. It didn't reveal Christmas decorations or old furniture or forgotten keepsakes. It revealed a living museum of my life. Steel shelving units lined the walls, neat, organized, obsessive. Row after row of black binders stood like soldiers at attention, each one labeled, each one cataloged. I stepped closer, my legs unsteady. The labels became clear. L. Johnson, 1994. Behavior notes. L. Johnson, 2001. Medical responses. L. Johnson, phone calls monitored. L. Johnson, incidents and emotional patterns. My knees buckled. This was not storage. It was surveillance. A case file 30 years deep. Nathan had documented every tear, every mood swing, every grocery trip that lasted longer than expected. He recorded my sleeping patterns, my medication dosages, the arguments we had, word for word, typed neatly, and annotated in red ink. I pulled a binder from the shelf at random. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. Inside were pages of handwritten notes. June 14, 1998. Subject became agitated during dinner, refused medication, raised voice, emotional instability noted. September 3, 2002. Subject left house without informing me of destination, returned 47 minutes later, questioned whereabouts, response defensive. January 19, 2010. Subject expressed dissatisfaction with holiday plans, tears observed, prescribed additional sedative. I wasn't reading about a stranger. I was reading about myself. But the woman in these pages wasn't me. She was unstable, irrational, difficult, a problem to be managed. I was not his wife. I was his experiment. He diagnosed me like a patient. He observed me like a subject, and he locked the evidence beneath our feet every night. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the shelf to steady myself, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. My eyes scanned the other binders, dozens of them, all marked with my initials, years and years of my life reduced to clinical notes and behavior logs. How long had he been watching me like this? Since the beginning? I thought back to our wedding day, the way he held my hand during our vows, the way he smiled when he said, "I do." Had he been studying me even then? My gaze drifted to the far corner of the basement, where a dark shape jutted out from the wall. I moved toward it, my funeral shoes clicking softly on the concrete floor. A false panel. Painted to blend with the wall, but not quite flush. I pressed against it. It shifted. Behind it was a safe. Heavy, dusty, cold to the touch. A digital keypad glowed faintly in the dim light. 4 numbers required. My hands hovered over the keys. I tried our anniversary first. 0817. The screen flashed red. Access denied. I tried his birthday. 1129. Red again. I closed my eyes, thinking, what date mattered most to him? What moment did he hold sacred? And then I remembered. May 12, 1991. The day he first told me he loved me. We were sitting on a park bench in downtown Fort Worth, the spring air warm and sweet. He took my hand and said those 3 words, and I believed him with every fiber of my being. A memory sweet as peach cobbler in summer. A memory that suddenly tasted like poison. I entered the date. 0512. The safe beeped. The lock disengaged with a soft metallic click. The door swung open. Inside were three things: a notarized psychiatric evaluation dated 2 months before Nathan's death, declaring me mentally unfit to make financial or legal decisions; a revised will, signed and witnessed, transferring the house and all assets to Nathan's brother until Lucia's stability improves; and a cassette tape, labeled in Nathan's precise handwriting, "For Lucia, if she disobeys." Ice crawled up my spine. He prepared for his death the same way he prepared for our marriage, methodically, strategically, with full control. He planned to erase me in slow motion. I lifted the tape from the safe. It was light in my hand, almost weightless, but it felt like holding a bomb. There was an old cassette player on the shelf beside the safe, dusty and outdated. I slid the tape inside and pressed play. Static crackled through the basement. And then Nathan's voice poured into the room, calm, clinical, chilling. "If she is listening to this, she has gone where she should not. She is not of stable mind. I have documented her behavior extensively, and the records speak for themselves. To my family, to my attorneys, to anyone reviewing this case, Lucia must be managed. Reduce her access to financial accounts. Keep her away from property decisions. She cannot be trusted to act in her own best interest. She must be protected from herself."
The tape continued, but I couldn't hear it anymore. My ears were ringing. Managed, not loved, not partnered, controlled. For 30 years, he wrote a story where I was the unstable one, and he expected everyone, doctors, relatives, attorneys, to believe it. But the one thing he didn't expect? Me opening the door. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by binders and files and the wreckage of my life, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not grief, not fear, rage. I pulled the nearest binder from the shelf. My hands trembled as I opened it. The label read, L. Johnson, Behavior Notes, 1997. Inside were pages of handwritten observations, dated, time-stamped, annotated in Nathan's precise script. March 4th, 1997, 2:15 p.m. Subject returned from grocery store 23 minutes later than expected. When questioned, became defensive, tone elevated, recommended monitoring. I remembered that day. I'd run into an old friend in the produce aisle. We talked, we laughed, I came home happy. But in his notes, I was defensive, elevated, a problem requiring monitoring. I turned the page. April 18th, 1997, 9:47 p.m. Subject cried during evening news segment about abandoned animals. Emotional response disproportionate. Possible hormonal fluctuation. I remembered that too. A shelter had been shut down. Dogs euthanized. I'd cried because I have a heart. But Nathan documented it like a symptom. My breath came faster. I reached for another binder. L. Johnson, Medical Responses, 2003. This one was typed, clinical, cold. Patient exhibits signs of anxiety when discussing financial decisions, refuses to accept medical guidance. Prescribed sedative increased to 5 milligrams to 10 milligrams. Patient compliant after extended discussion. Patient. Not wife, not partner, patient. I remembered that conversation. I'd asked to see our bank statements. He told me not to worry myself, that stress wasn't good for my health. He'd given me a pill, told me to rest, and I took it because I trusted him. I grabbed another binder, then another, pulling them down in a frenzy. They lined the floor around me like evidence at a crime scene. Phone calls monitored.
Inside were transcripts, actual transcripts of my phone conversations with my sister, with friends, with the hairdresser, for God's sakes. July 12, 2008, call to Sister Helen, 14 minutes. Subject complained about canceled vacation plans. Tone resentful. Discussed feeling controlled. Monitor for escalation. Controlled. I'd said that word once in confidence to my sister, and Nathan had been listening. Emotional patterns. This binder was thicker. Charts, graphs, color-coded calendars marking my moods like weather systems. Subject experiences increased agitation during budget discussions, social events without husband present, visits from family members, menstrual cycle, days 21 through 28. He'd been tracking me like a science experiment, reducing my life to variables and data points. I thought about all the times he'd suggested I skip a family gathering because I seemed tired, all the times he'd canceled plans because I wasn't feeling well, all the times he'd given me a pill and told me to rest. I wasn't tired, I wasn't unwell, I was being managed. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. The shock was too deep, buried beneath layers of disbelief. I flipped through more pages, every grocery trip timed, every phone call logged, every tear cataloged. Arguments I'd forgotten were reproduced word for word with his annotations in the margins. Subject raised voice, irrational.
Subject questioned my judgment, concerning. Subject expressed desire for independence, delusional. Events I remembered, moments I'd lived. But his interpretation twisted them into something unrecognizable, something sick. I wasn't his wife. I was a monitored subject. He diagnosed me like a patient, observed me like a specimen under glass. And every night, at 9:30 p.m., he came down here and added to the file. For 30 years. I stood slowly, my legs stiff, and looked at the shelves. Dozens of binders, hundreds of pages, thousands of entries. My entire life reduced to clinical notes and behavioral assessments. This wasn't love. This was data. I stood slowly. My legs were stiff, but my hands were steady now. The shock had burned away, replaced by something cold and sharp. Clarity. I began pulling binders from the shelves, armfuls of them. I stacked them on the floor, then carried them up the basement stairs. Trip after trip. My arms ached. My breath came hard, but I didn't stop. I loaded them into the back of my car. The psychiatric evaluation, the revised will, the cassette tape. Every piece of evidence Nathan had compiled to prove I was unstable. Outside, the Texas sky was darkening. Clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and black. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The air smelled like rain and electricity. A storm was coming. I stood in the driveway, car door open, and looked back at the house. Our house. The place I'd cleaned and cooked and lived for 30 decades, while Nathan documented my every move in the basement below. He thought he could bury me with paperwork. He thought he could lock me away in a legal cage and throw away the key. He thought I would never fight back. But he was wrong. She will not be erased. I didn't wait. The morning after I emptied the basement, I walked into the offices of Morales and Associates on West 7th Street. No appointment, no warning, just 3 cardboard boxes stacked on a dolly and a woman who'd stopped apologizing for taking up space. The receptionist looked uncertain. I looked her dead in the eye. I need to speak with Attorney Morales. Tell her it's about 30 years of evidence. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Elena Morales in an office that smelled like leather and old books. She was younger than I expected, mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. I set the first binder on her desk without preamble. My husband documented me like a lab rat for 30 decades. Then he tried to have me declared incompetent so his brother could take everything. She opened the binder, started reading. Her jaw tightened. She reached for the second binder, then the third. She read for 40 minutes without speaking, her pen moving in quick, angry strokes across a legal pad. Finally, she looked up. "Mrs. Johnson." Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white around the pen. "This is institutional abuse, coercive control, psychological entrapment." She tapped the psychiatric evaluation. "This document? It's fraud. The doctor who signed this never met you." My breath caught. "How do you know?" "Because he died in 2019. The room tilted. Nathan had forged it, signed a dead man's name to bury me alive. Elena leaned forward. "We filed today. Contest the will, petition for full restoration of your rights, and pursue criminal investigation into financial coercion. His brother won't take this quietly." "Good." Her smile was cold. "Let him fight. Every word he says will prove our case." 3 days later, Nathan's brother Marcus stormed into my house without knocking. His face was red, his voice loud enough to rattle windows. "You're not thinking straight, Lucia. Nathan knew you needed help. He was protecting you." I stood in the hallway, arms crossed, and didn't flinch. Protecting me. Or protecting his control. "You're unstable. I have 30 years of evidence that says otherwise." His mouth opened, closed. He turned and slammed the door so hard a picture frame fell from the wall. That night I called Elena. "He's going to use Nathan's documentation against me." "Let him try." Her voice was steel. "He built a cage, Lucia." I looked at the empty basement doorway, at the space that used to hold my prison, and I whispered the words that felt like a match striking. "Then burn it." The courtroom smelled like old wood and nervous sweat.
I wore pale blue, not funeral black, spring-colored, alive-colored. Nathan's family filled the first 2 rows like a jury already decided. Marcus sat front and center, arms crossed, jaw set. Behind him, distant cousins I hadn't seen in years, neighbors who'd brought casseroles in pity. They all came to watch me fall apart. Elena Morales stood beside me, a hand briefly on my shoulder. "Ready?" I nodded. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She looked at the mountain of binders stacked on the plaintiff's table, then at me. "Mrs. Johnson, you may take the stand." I walked forward. My legs didn't shake, my hands didn't tremble. I placed my palm on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth. Elena began with simple questions. "How long were you married?" 30 years. "Did your husband ever allow you access to financial accounts?" "No." "Did he ever consult you about major decisions?" "No." Then she held up the first binder. "Mrs. Johnson, can you tell the court what this is?" "A surveillance log. My husband documented my behavior, every conversation, every emotion, every minute I left the house, for 30 years. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Marcus leaned forward, shaking his head. Elena opened the binder, read aloud. "Subject became agitated during dinner, refused medication, emotional instability noted." She looked at me. "Do you remember this day?" "Yes. I asked Nathan why we couldn't visit my sister for Christmas. He said I was being irrational and gave me a sedative." Subject left house without informing destination, response defensive when questioned. "I ran into a friend at the grocery store. We talked for 20 minutes. I came home happy. He documented it like I'd committed a crime."
The courtroom was silent now. Even Marcus had stopped shaking his head. Elena reached for the cassette player. "Your Honor, I'd like to play Exhibit C, a recording made by Nathan Johnson 2 months before his death." She pressed play. Nathan's voice filled the room. Calm, clinical, venomous. "She is not of stable mind. She must be managed. Reduce her access. Keep her away from property decisions. This is not cruelty. This is care." Someone in the back row gasped. The judge's expression hardened. Elena let the silence stretch, then spoke quietly. "Mrs. Johnson, did your husband love you?" I met her eyes. Then I looked at Marcus, at the neighbors, at every person who'd believed Nathan's carefully constructed lie. "No," I said clearly. "He controlled me." The judge's gavel fell like thunder. "The will is overturned. All property and assets belong to Lucia Johnson. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation." Marcus shot to his feet, face purple. "This is insane. Mr. Johnson, sit down or be removed." He sat. The judge looked at me, and something almost like respect flickered in her eyes. "Mrs. Johnson, you are free." Outside, the Texas sun was blinding. Elena walked me to my car, triumph in her stride. "You did it." I looked back at the courthouse, at the building where Nathan's lies had finally died. He tried to bury me in that basement. Instead, I resurrected. I waited for a clear night. No rain, no wind. Just the wide Texas sky stretched above my backyard like a witness. I carried the binders out one by one, all 43 of them, and stacked them in the old fire pit Nathan had built years ago. The same pit where we'd roasted marshmallows on summer nights while he smiled and called me darling and documented my laughter like evidence. The irony wasn't lost on me. I doused the pile with lighter fluid, struck a match. The flame caught instantly. Orange and gold and furious, the fire climbed through the pages. 30 years of surveillance curled and blackened. Behavior notes turned to ash. Medical annotations dissolved into smoke. Every word he'd written about my instability, my agitation, my need for management, all of it rose into the night sky and disappeared. I stood there for 2 hours, feeding the fire until nothing remained but embers. When the last page burned, I felt something break open in my chest.
Not grief. Relief. The basement took 3 weeks to transform. I hired a crew to tear out the steel shelving. The cold fluorescent bulbs came down. The concrete floor got covered in warm, honey-colored wood. I painted the walls a soft cream and hung curtains the color of sunrise. Where Nathan's binders once stood, I placed a sewing table. Where he kept his surveillance equipment, I set up a record player. Where he documented my tears, I hung photographs of my sister, my friends, my life before him. The room once filled with control now held my freedom. I brought down my grandmother's quilt, the one Nathan said was too old to display. I draped it over the reading chair in the corner, plugged in a lamp with an amber shade, filled the shelves with books I'd always wanted to read but he said were too complex for me. The first time I sat in that chair, tears came. Not sad tears, the kind that wash away years of dust. I played Etta James on the record player, let the music fill every corner where his voice used to live, sang along without worrying if I was too loud or too emotional. I breathed like I hadn't in 30 years. Deep, full, mine. Now when I pass the basement door, I don't flinch. I don't hesitate. I don't remember his warning, don't go down there, ever. The door stays unlocked, not because I've forgotten, but because I've reclaimed it. Some mornings I stand at the top of the stairs with coffee in hand and just look down at the warm light spilling up from below. The room that was supposed to be my prison became the birthplace of my freedom. And every time I descend those stairs, not in fear but in peace, I know the truth. He built the cage, but I hold the key. It's been a year since I opened that door, a year since I discovered that the man I called my husband
had spent 30 decades turning love into surveillance, marriage into management, partnership into pathology. Some nights I still dream about the basement, about the rows of binders with my name on them, about Nathan's voice on that tape, cold and clinical, reducing me to a problem that needed solving. But I don't wake up afraid anymore. I wake up free. This morning I stood at the basement door one last time before heading out. My hand rested on the brass knob, the same one I'd been forbidden to touch for 30 years. The lock is gone now, removed, melted down and thrown away. But I realized something standing there. The real lock was never made of metal. It was psychological, built from years of, "You're too emotional. You're not thinking clearly. Let me handle it, darling." Constructed from pills I didn't need and decisions I wasn't allowed to make. Reinforced every time I apologized for having feelings, for asking questions, for wanting control over my own life. Nathan didn't just lock a door. He locked me. But the moment I turned that handle, the moment I chose truth over obedience, every lock he'd ever placed on my life shattered. I walk through my house now and it feels different, lighter, warmer. Mine. The mornings taste like coffee instead of sedatives. The afternoons stretch with possibility instead of surveillance. The nights belong to me, not to a man documenting my every move in a basement filled with files. I am 70 years old. Some might say I wasted 30 years, but I don't see it that way, because those 30 years taught me something invaluable. Freedom isn't given, it's reclaimed. And sometimes reclaiming it means opening the door you were told never to touch. If you're reading this, if you recognize even a whisper of my story in your own life, I need you to hear me. If a door in your life has been locked for too long, turn the handle. Maybe it's a literal door, a room you're not allowed to enter, a phone you're not allowed to check, a bank account you're not allowed to see. Or maybe it's psychological, a boundary you're not allowed to set, a question you're not allowed to ask, a version of yourself you're not allowed to be. Turn it anyway. Truth may terrify you. It may upend your world, shatter your sense of safety, force you to see things you'd rather deny. But it will also set you free. I stand at my basement door now, not with fear, but with power. Because the woman who was told she was too unstable to manage her own life just burned 30 years of lies and rebuilt a future from the ashes. And if I can do it at 70, you can do it too. The lock was always an illusion. The key was always yours. Turn the handle. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because some truths need to be heard. Share this with someone who needs to know. The cage was never real. You've always held the key.